Hello, welcome to Let's Dish. I'm Jill Jonathan with Red Wine and Blue. We are a community of women who use digital media and friend to friend organizing to change one suburb at a time. And Let's Dish is our Facebook Live show that we explore what's going on in the different states. And today we're exploring Pennsylvania. So today I'm going to dish with Sherry, who's one of our organizers from Pennsylvania, and we are going to talk about pregnancy crisis centers. This is a big thing that's being talked about in Pennsylvania. And Sherry, first of all, I want to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. And we are going to go ahead and start off with just some clips of videos just to give everybody an idea of what we're talking about here. And then we'll continue the conversation.
Can't help but sitting here and thinking of all the funds that we've put towards these CPCs if we had dedicated them to making sure that there were more health clinics available in neighborhoods where people can access them. They are consummate opportunists, and it just really grates me. It's wrong. It's absolutely wrong that we're allocating funds to this.
Telling people that they are more likely to get cancer if they get an abortion, that abortion increases their likelihood of becoming infertile and never having children again. We all know that there's no scientific basis behind any of this. They're scare tactic to dissuade people from exercising their right to access abortion care.
So Sherry, some words that I heard there were opportunistic, misleading, different things like that. So can you just start off and tell us, what is a pregnancy crisis center?
Well, they're created almost always religious backed, and they tell people and they advertise that they're there to help women with pregnancy tests and prenatal care, maternal care. And the reality is they're there simply to have women come in. They target low-income areas, and they want women to come in. They'll do a pregnancy test, which is the same pregnancy test that these days you can buy in the dollar store, tell them that they're pregnant, and then talk to them about their options, which starts with why abortion is wrong, and try to talk them out of having an abortion. That's the entire goal, is these were started back in the 60s by anti-abortion groups.
Okay. And I want to show a graphic that we have that shows the growth of pregnancy crisis centers so we can just see how it has grown over the years. Can you just walk us through this graphic and what it means?
Well, it's showing, of course, on the left-hand side, the number of abortion facilities back in 1978. We had over, 2,700. But the number of abortion facilities now are down to 780. But the crisis pregnancy centers are now almost at the same numbers of what we had as abortion facilities back in 1978. It's growing by leaps and bounds. They're getting funding from the states, which there's no oversight, and we'll go into more detail about that. But it's very upsetting to know that they're focused on misinformation. Their whole focus is on keeping women from having access to choice, and they'll stop at nothing to try to talk women out of having the abortion. And the interesting thing is, the reality is over 80% of the women who go to these crisis pregnancy centers don't intend to have an abortion anyway. They're going in there because they think they're going to get prenatal care that perhaps they're not insured, or with all the, problems we have right now of having good quality health care available in some of our neighborhoods, they're feeling that this is their option for prenatal care. And that's not a service that's actually provided there.
And so I'm assuming that, the women that are going to these pregnancy centers, they're kind of, they're looking for some help. Like you said, they're not getting adequate health care. They might not have supportive family. So they're going to these centers for support. So when they go to these centers, what do they actually get when they enter the center?
They get a pregnancy test. Again, it's almost always a urine-based test, which we can get anywhere. They're told that they're pregnant. When the woman then asks for options about prenatal care, sometimes they'll get a referral out to a clinic. Often, the person there just says, oh, as long as you're keeping your baby, we're so happy about this. And I don't know, we don't provide prenatal care. That's not what we're here for. They don't give out prenatal vitamins. They don't even give out nutritional advice on how to care for yourself through the pregnancy. As long as they have prevented the abortion, their work is done. And again, 80% of the women going there weren't looking to make any choice at all. They were looking for services that they're not going to get there.
Yeah, and then I just want to go into accountability, which we have a graphic that kind of describes that as well. And what's most striking to me, the number that really stands out to me is this 300 to 700,000 number that heads of these centers are making this kind of salary. So can you just talk to us a little bit about accountability and who's actually on the winning end of these crisis centers?
The winning end are people like the organization called Real Alternatives, that has a bulk of the crisis pregnancy centers in Pennsylvania, as well as many other states. They, as you can see there, are paying themselves anywhere from $300,000 to $700,000 a year as the CEO or heads of the local state chapters. They're skimming money right off the top that's supposed to go to other programs and using it for their salaries for themselves. And they also were found, great organization called Equity, I think it's Equity Now. They did a study and used the open records law and were able to access some of the records that showed what was happening. They were skimming up to 3% of all the money from the Commonwealth to send it to other states to try to open crisis pregnancy centers in those states. So as a taxpayer here in Pennsylvania, number one, I don't want my taxes being used for misinformation for pregnant women, and I certainly don't want it used to open centers to harm women in other states. And then in 2020, during COVID, when all of the federal funding came to our Commonwealth, $3 million of it went to these organizations.
$3 million.
They did not provide any COVID relief, but $3 million of our relief fund went to these organizations.
So what are your thoughts? When I hear pregnancy crisis center, that sounds like a good thing to me. Like when I hear pro-life, that sounds like a good thing to me. So this messaging, I keep talking about this misleading messaging, and why I think if people are just hearing this conversation, before we like dive into the details of it, like, well, what's wrong? Don't we want people to have the support that they have? But tell me, like, what is the motivation of using $3 million for these pregnancy crisis centers?
Well, the crisis pregnancy centers also get money from, I always forget what it's called, it's TANF, and it's providing aid for needy families in Pennsylvania. So the crisis pregnancy centers realized quickly that in places like Pennsylvania, which is Republican run, and also if you go to Harrisburg, the Catholic Conference Center is right next to our state capitol, and their building is almost as large as our capitol. They run most of these. They're all religious based. And what happens is they get the funding, then they went back and skimmed off more money by saying we need aid from, the money from the aid for needy families, because we'll get some diapers and formula and distribute it. It's a very small amount of what they do, but they double dipped and got even more of our money. Then they went back and said, we want part of the funding that's going out for sex education programs. And our Commonwealth, our Republican leadership voted and gave them more money on top of everything else. But their sex ed training in the schools that allow them to come in is abstinence only. That's the basis of their sex ed. So we're getting hit 3 different ways here in the Commonwealth by these crisis pregnancy centers. And then to have no oversight. The reporting that comes in is minimal. Most of the information found out about these is through tax filings for the nonprofits, not through any records from our leadership in Harrisburg. And that's why it's really important that we have Senator Katie Muth and, Senator Judy Swank joining with several of our people in the House who are doing these joint sessions to learn more about it and starting to write legislation to stop this. Michigan went very public about the crisis pregnancy centers, the lack of oversight, and how they were siphoning money out of Michiganders. And the people rose up and the centers were shut down. They're there. I shouldn't say they're shut down. They no longer get government funding. And that's what we need to have happen here in Pennsylvania. And I'll tell you on a personal note, this is very important to me. At 19, I had an unplanned pregnancy. I went to Planned Parenthood and chose to not have an abortion. And I also chose not to parent. And Planned Parenthood, when I said I'm choosing adoption, I think, said we don't handle adoption, but here's information for you. And they gave me guidance of where to go. And for me, it worked out well. I then got involved in, going to Harrisburg to lobby to open the records for adult adoptees in Pennsylvania. And as I would walk into the office of a congressional, a House of Representative person or a senator, the very first question they asked me is, what does Catholic Conference think? Does Catholic Conference support this bill? And that's when I learned the power of religion in our state house in Harrisburg. And sadly, it has grown now to becoming a big money maker. Girls who go to the Crisis Pregnancy Center, they're talked out of abortion through a lot of misinformation and deceptive practices. On top of that, for the 80% who never intended to abort anyway, they're encouraged to keep coming back for peer-to-peer counseling. It's not really peer-to-peer. It's volunteer women who run it, and the whole thing is about getting them to then join the church. And it's all Bible study. It's focusing on getting them to become Catholic or whichever organization is running the Crisis Pregnancy Center. So they want to stop abortion and convert people to their faith. And we're paying for it.
I literally gasped when you said that. It's just shocking. Well, I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure it is shocking, to be honest. But and that's what taxpayer money is going towards. I mean, and then I also want to talk about, and first of all, thank you for sharing your story. I really appreciate that as a young woman, 19. And I just want to talk about the kind of women that they're targeting, which is young women. And then there's also racial implications to this as well. So can you just walk us through this and how this is affecting people, Black women, and other women of color a little bit more than white women?
Yes. I will say, first of all, thank you so much to Women's Law Project and all the other organizations who presented in Harrisburg the other day. And as you can see on the quote there, we're just beginning to reckon with the long, shameful history of racism, sexism, abuse, everything. And then we find out that they're now targeting these women. And there we go, the temporary assistance for needy families. They're taking that money, which is meant for low-income houses, to help women keep their family together, to keep children out of foster care. And instead, they're sending it over to these organizations. The organizations say we're entitled to this money because we're opening centers in these low-income areas in the inner city, and they are definitely, targeting women of color. And it's not just Black women anymore. They're also starting to target Hispanic areas and feeling like they have a greater likelihood of making sure that they get involved in the church and don't have an abortion too. They promise to offer services, as we discussed, that are not there. They're not offering prenatal care. So for women of color who are in a healthcare desert to begin with, and they think I can go here and get an ultrasound to make sure my baby's okay, it's a non-medical ultrasound that these facilities can provide. They do not normally have a trained clinician on site, so they can just do this ultrasound and they cannot tell you, are the measurements correct or anything that any of us who have had a child and gone through an ultrasound know what that process is all about. But what they do is take a quick picture and say, look, here's your baby. See the heart beating? See the heart beating? This is a baby, not a choice. And they focus more on that. And in communities of women of color, as the numbers say there, the mortality rate for maternal mortality rate is horrible here in Pennsylvania. That 23% of women who die from pregnancy complication are Black, but only 14% of total births in Pennsylvania in that time period are to women of color. That tells you we are failing them all the way around, yet we are transitioning funds meant to help this community into people who are not using it to help the community.
Oh my goodness. It's like follow the money, right? And we're going to wrap up this conversation. I feel like I could continue talking about this for a lot longer. So for anybody who's interested in learning more, do you have any good resources that people can check out where they might get a little bit more information?
Yes. If you Google Katie Muth, Senator Katie Muth, you will see articles that popped up all over the place in the last few days highlighting the commission that happened 2 days ago. There's also a 72-page document available. If you Google Crisis Pregnancy Center Women's Law Project, you'll find the 72-page paper, which was a complete comprehensive study crossing all different, I think it was 9 different states that were researched. And the findings are absolutely amazing. I'm very thankful that they're out there doing this work.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And just, we're talking about Pennsylvania, but it's not just affecting Pennsylvania. No. There's other states out there as well that it's affecting.
There's 29 states in total.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Sherry, thank you so much for sharing this information. One of my favorite shows that I watch is The Readout with Joy Reid, and she always says sharing is caring. So that just popped in my head right now, because I'm like, this is pretty heavy, but it's sharing is caring. Like, we have to know what's going on. And so we know who we want to put into office.
Absolutely.
So that's why it's important to pay attention to everybody that's on that ballot. So definitely pay attention to that and vote in November. And then before we go, we always do a toast to joy, because we don't want to end with doom and gloom. We have a great podcast called The Suburban Women Problem that comes out on Wednesdays. They do the toast to joy. So we thought we'd bring it here to Let's Dish. So it's just like saying something that you're thankful for. And I'll go first. And I actually just mentioned it. The Readout is one of my favorite shows with Joy Reid. I listen to the podcast the next day when I'm walking in the morning on the treadmill. And I'm just so grateful for her candidness and just like getting information in an interesting way. So that's my toast to joy today. Sherry, what about you? What's your toast to joy?
If I was going to say a podcast, it would be Pod Save America and John Lovett, Love It or Leave It. They make me laugh every time. Our own podcast is fabulous and educates me every time. An absolute joy for me right now, though, is living in a place that has change of season.
Yes.
As we move from season to season, I'm like, I love the summer. Then the summer's too hot. Now it's fall. And so I'm really excited to have the temperatures dropping and moving toward fall.
Yeah, I agree with that too. When I walk my dog in the mornings during the summer, I come back sweaty just from a 20-minute walk. So today I was like, wow, I'm not sweaty. This is so nice. Exactly. I'm really grateful for that. So I totally agree with that. And I want everybody to know that Let's Dish with Pennsylvania is here every Thursday at noon. So please tune in and join us next week. Also follow us on social media. We keep you in the know and we'll keep you inspired to keep going. That's really what we want to do. We're just a strong community and we're here to help. If you have any questions that you want answered here on Let's Dish with Pennsylvania, feel free to reach out to me, Sherry, put it in the comments. We're here for you. So thanks again, Sherry. I appreciate your knowledge and we'll see you next week on Let's Dish.
Take care.